Like and subscribe for endless entertainment. Our story starts off with two assassins giving mafia members an all-expense-paid trip to heaven, and after 6 of them are down, the man decides to leave. The woman argues that they should do a squad wipe, but he tells her that if the boss wanted all of them gone, he would have ordered him to do so. The assassin walks to the big room but notices a drone suspiciously flying above, so he decides it's time to speed away from this location and reveals that they've been spotted by someone. Many heavily armed men begins following the bus, but when they get close enough they start firing at them, so the men decide to feed everything inside lead until it becomes fireworks. It's revealed that the assassin knew he couldn't outrun them, so they decided to rig up a pewer that fires whenever the bus shakes, and while their pursuers are distracted they jumped out of the vehicle to escape. Their plan worked surprisingly well, but the woman was injured during the jump from the car, so the man goes over to patch her up while wondering how the drone knew where to look for him. They wait until all their pursuers are out of sight and decides to rest until dawn, so the drone's infrared camera can't detect them again. The woman questions why he became an assassin, and the man reveals that from the moment he was born, the organization trained him to be the best at turning people into hashtags until all his emotions have disappeared. But this is supposed to be his last mission because age is an enemy that no one can defeat, and soon he'll teach the next generation of assassins, with her being among the first. The woman claims that she's the top of her class, so she doesn't need a teacher, until he points a pewer at her face and she realizes that he has stolen her weapon. The assassin begins scolding her for being too trusting and asks what they taught her to do in this situation, but she tells him that none of her training would work against him. Her teacher tells her to have faith in no one within this occupation before putting her pewer back where he got it from. He goes to have a rest, but she pulls out the Uno reverse card and asks why he trusts her not to blow his mind, but the assassin reveals that he took all the bullets out of her weapon before heading off to rest. In the morning, the duo returns to their base and reports that they have completed their missions. The organization wishes him well on his new role in the company and tells them to return home with the passports and tickets they have provided. The assassins go on Spirit Airlines to travel, but while flying it begins shaking intensely and everyone starts freaking out. The man theorizes that the organization did this so all their secrets will pass with him, and they assigned a student to this mission so he'll be forced to protect her while trying to save himself. The assassin goes into the cockpit and finds that the pilots are already flying up to heaven, so he attempts to steer the aircraft and sees a jet nearby which goes behind the plane to fire an air-to-air missile to transform everyone on board into angels. Our MC floats in the abyss and questions why they would do this to him and regains his emotions from the anger he feels from their betrayal. An arm suddenly comes from the surface to take his soul to the realm of gods, where the goddess taunts him for being an assassin who got assassinated and tells him that she brought him to this world to make him an offer. He questions what they are and she explains that he can either be reincarnated but forget all his memories, or accept her quest and be reincarnated into a fantasy filled with magic so he can make the hero past tense. He decides to take on her mission but says that in his next life he plans to live for himself instead of being a tool for others, but the goddess doesn't care as long as he completes her quest and gives him all the knowledge that he will need to survive the new world. The assassin questions why the hero needs to be smoked, so she reveals that 15 years after he is reborn, the hero will overpower the demon lord and bring peace to the world, but 3 years later he will use that same power to bring about its destruction. The assassin questions how he will be able to defeat him since he has powers far beyond normal humans, and the goddess says she will grant him the highest stats along with the opportunity to choose one skill from each rank as well as his magic affinity. Our MC finishes off by asking about his time limit, and she tells him that her priority is to make the world a peaceful place, so he should smoke the hero after he defeats the demon lord, but if he finds another way to bring about peace without completing the mission, that's also acceptable. Our assassin begins picking his skills from the list and reveals that the hero is born with at least 5 S rank and 30 A rank abilities, but he'll have to do with 5. He picks Rapid Recovery as his S rank to heal faster, Spell Waiver as his A rank to create new abilities, Limitless Growth as his B rank to allow him to learn faster, Martial Arts as his C rank so he can deliver an ass beating, and for his D rank skill he selects something that the gods saw no potential in. Our assassin moves on to select his attributes and decides to go with the 4 basic elements to complete his character build. The goddess sees that he's ready and begins using her power to perform the rebirth spell while wishing our MC good luck in his new life. Lugh awakens in the new world as a baby, and his father comes over to tell him that he's the heir to the family of assassins. His mother begins freaking out because she doesn't want to lose another child, but he promises that he will never allow that to happen again. 7 years later, we find Lugh hunting in the forest. He begins tracking a rabbit's trail and reveals that he hasn't learned any magic, but training like this still increases his mana pool. As our assassin finds the adorable animal minding its own business and decides to give it an extra hole so it can become his dinner. His mother begs him to let her cook, but he rather does it himself because it allows him to give his body exactly what it needs to grow as strong as possible. Lugh treats his parents to lunch and they praise him for the delicious meal he made before deciding to turn it into a family specialty. His father tells him to meet him at the training grounds and Lugh begins walking down to the basement until he arrives in a dark room. Our MC begins taking off all his clothes in front of the grown man and he begins to perform poses that allows his father to track exactly how his body is developing as he continues to grow. He tells Lugh that his body have become strong enough to gain their family's mystic eyes and decides to perform the surgery immediately. His mom starts taking care of him while he's gaining his Sharingan and rejoices that Lugh needs her in his life again before forcing her stress relievers into his face to suffocate him in happiness. His father interrupts them so Lugh escapes from his capture to beg for help and he decides that his eyes are fully healed. They take him to a balcony to remove the bandages and our MC opens his eyes and realizes that he is now able to peep on anyone within his region, along with the addition of seeing mana flowing inside people's body. His father tells him that one day he will learn the family secret to perform it on his own child and reveals that a magic tutor is on their way to teach him their arts. Lugh's mother begins forcing him to cross-dress because she thinks he's adorable in a dress and sends him outside to meet with his teacher. Dia arrives at his home and is very confused about her student's gender, but he wonders if she's too young to be a mage. So Dia casts a powerful spell to prove herself and reveals that among the casters of the kingdom she is within the top 5. They go to the garden for his first lesson and Dia starts off by giving Lugh a stone to see how much mana he has. Our MC begins pouring all of his power into the object until it begins overflowing and cracks. But Dia tells him to toss it as far as he can before it becomes a nuclear explosion that even scares the crap out of his teacher. Lugh's parents come over and question what happened, but upon hearing that their son caused the fireworks, they begin praising our little monster for his destructive capabilities and tell them to keep up the good work. Lugh asks for more mana stones, but she refuses because her family isn't allowed to give them out. In the night he begins thinking of a way to get more stones since they'll help him defeat the hero, but suddenly a knock comes at the door. Dia walks into the room to sleep with our MC and claims him as her little brother before they begin drifting off into dreamland. The next day, Dia begins testing Lugh's attributes and finds that he has access to the 4 basic elemental magic, which is surprising because most people are born with 1 and it was considered rare for her to have 2. She decides to teach him earth magic and begins touching the boy in his special place so his mana starts to change into an element. He gains a vision of letters in his head and it's explained that people in this world learn spells by revelations and they can level it up by casting them often, but Lugh can't read the letters. Dia shows him how it's done and our MC does a Walmart version of her spell because he couldn't pronounce the words properly. After many attempts he gets close to mastering the spell, but he asks if it's possible to learn magic by writing it down instead of waiting for a vision. Dia tests his theory with iron and finds that it's possible to use spells without visions, so Lugh asks her to write down all the earth magic she knows in return for one favor. While she's explaining how spells work, he realizes that the magic system is based on chemistry and figures out that they may be able to make spells that doesn't exist. He tells Dia the properties of gold, but when she attempts the spell she falls ill and feels extremely weak. However, Lugh is able to use it successfully and realizes that his spell weaver skill is what allows him to use magic without visions. So he uses his ability to write down the magic formula, then asks her to read it again, and this time she managed to succeed. They go to a lake far away where Lugh summons the American spirit to destroy Mother Nature and Dia casts the freedom spell to punish a tree for existing. Lugh thinks that he is still nowhere close to the hero's power and summons a giant pure to fire a blast that obliterates anything it hits in that direction. In the night, the two friends sleep together and Dia reveals that tomorrow will be their last day together. So our MC walks outside of bed to summon a hole maker for Dia that represents what they made together and thanks her for everything she has taught him. Dé takes off her necklace to give a mana stone to Lugh and reveals that the favor she'll ask him for is to come whenever she wants to see him. The next day, Lugh's family thanks Dé for what she has done and bids her farewell for the time being. His father tells him that he is old enough to know the truth of their family, and they go to a prison holding many of the most vicious criminals on the planet. Lugh's father says it's time for him to practice smoking people so he won't feel guilt. But Lugh asks why he didn't just raise him without emotions to be used as a tool for assassinations. His father explains that they send people on the Heaven Express for the good of the kingdom, so they must possess human morality to understand who should pass away. He opens a door and invites his son inside to see a woman bondage to a chair and explains that this woman robbed an elderly couple's home. But when they came back, she banished them to the Shadow Realm, then set their house on fire, so the kingdom sentenced her to hell. Lugh begins walking towards the criminal while she begs for her worthless life and casually disarms her with his new blade. The woman gets enraged at them for what they did and promises that one day she'll burn them, so Lugh decides to end her subscription to life. 3 years later, we find Tart walking through the forest, and she explains that her family abandoned her because they didn't have enough food to feed everyone in the family during winter. She sees that many good boys have come to turn her into dinner, but when it tries to taste the flavor, it eats an arrow instead as our MC arrives to rescue her. He summons his hole makers, and the first wolf volunteers to test if all dogs go to heaven, along with another who receives immediate brain surgery. He goes to protect Tart, but 2 more takes the chance to pin him down, so he flips over the beasts before viciously fisting the last one. Lugh asks why she's in the woods alone, so she explains what her family did to her and tells him that she heard rumors that this kingdom was rich, so she decided to walk here. Our MC begins cooking some porridge and hands her a bowl of his food, but warns her that she shouldn't eat it too quickly. He reveals that he is the son of the lord of this region and offers her the chance to come back with him, which makes her very excited. But he reveals that he's smoked many people in his life, and to return with him means she'll have to help to accomplish these goals. And after hearing all this, Tart decides to join him along his journey. Lugh thinks that he was looking for someone with mana, so he began to show the poor girl many acts of kindness to successfully gaslight her into becoming his worker without pay. 2 years later, Lugh awakens to the world's greatest investment by his side, and she announces that his food is ready. He begins eating with his family while Tart serves him like the king he is. His father compliments him on his choice of servant, and Tart tells them that if our MC didn't save her, she would have passed away. So now everything she is belongs to him. Lugh tells her to meet him at the training room, and she goes down into the basement where he tells her to take off her paradise carriers. Then she begins performing the movements so he can see how well her body has developed through her training. Lugh explains that in exchange for letting Tart stay, his father told him that he must teach her their ways, and if she betrays them, he must put her down. Tart begins putting on her clothes, but Lugh tells her to follow him, and while his back is turned, she makes an attempt on his life, so he introduces her to the floor. She apologizes for being taken down so easily, but she sees a spear on the wall and finds out that she has a natural affinity for it. In the night, Tart tries to train with a hole maker but has no success in using it. So Lugh walks in and summons a segmented spear for her to try. Our waifu begins bringing great destruction to all the targets that enters her path, and our little monster applauds for her newfound talent that he now possesses. Lugh goes to his room to place the filled mana stone he created into a secret storage area, but Tart suddenly opens the door to report that his father wishes to see him. They meet in the training room, and he tells his son that the time has come for them to have a 1v1 to test how far he has come over the years. The battle takes place in the forest, and we find our assassin stealthily sneaking around. He gets attacked from the shadows and begins heading towards where it came from to find his father's location. The 2 assassins begins fighting in close combat, but Lugh is the first to make a mistake and gets his ankles broken before landing a counterattack. He heals his legs and finds that his father has gone back into hiding. So our MC decides to make the first move, only to encounter a trap that his father uses to make an attempt on his life. They continue fighting with body dividers, but this time Lugh manages to injure his father, which forces him to retreat into the shadows. Our MC realizes that his father is a badass, and starts wondering if it's his lack of experience or the emotions he holds for family that's holding him back. Lugh decides to use beast-breathing 7th form to sense his father, but finds a knife targeting him from the left and another coming on the right that he manages to deflect, while his father comes from above to strike him in the shoulder. However, Lugh takes the win by threatening to make him a head shorter. His father congratulates him for winning the battle even though he nerfed himself by not using magic, and tells his son that from this point on there is nothing to teach him. The father and son decide to have some bonding time by giving every noble that has been causing trouble for the kingdom an all-paid express trip straight to the gates of hell before picking up their everyday lives as a doctor. His father tells him that assassins sometimes have to be disguised as someone else to carry out their mission. So for his final test, he will send our MC to act as the head of the Merchant Guild's illegitimate child to learn their ways and gain connections. In the night, they hold a ceremony to wish Lugh well on his final trial that will name him as the official heir to their clan. But someone steps up to dispute the decision because he is far too young to be their next leader. Lugh's father decides to make the boys have a 1v1 to choose the next head, and Lugh instantly threatens to give him a bigger breathing hole. Rona says that it's dishonorable, but the Lord points out that they're assassins. So he attempts to fist our MC and gets an intimate moment with the floor followed by a broken arm as his reward. Lugh's father gloats about how talented his son is and everyone begins to cheer him on. But after the party, the two boys meets again and Lugh offers him the chance to become the knight of his family when he becomes the head, then takes out a sword to give him as a peace offering. So Rona says that after he returns from his test, he will be a much better knight to serve him. The next day, Lugh and Tart gets ready to go on the final test, then leaves their homes behind to learn the ways of a merchant.
Like for a cat girl, subscribe for a waifu, and remember to stay swifty.